Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're not just observing a conflict. We are plunging into the philosophical root of almost every personal struggle, every regrettable decision, and, every triumph you have ever experienced.
You really are.
We are tackling the tension between cold, hard reason and hot, demanding desire.
This is the internal battlefield that has defined moral philosophy since the very beginning. And if you stop and observe your own day, you'll realize this war is constant.
Oh, absolutely.
It's that moment you should be working, but you reach for your phone for that mindless scrolling instead.
Right.
It's the persistent frustration of seeking satisfaction from what a philosopher might call an indifferent lover, or just the unnecessary suffering we cause ourselves chasing things that deep down we know won't bring any lasting fulfillment.
Absolutely. And we all recognize desire as this incredible necessary engine. I mean, it drives artistic creation, technological leaps, political change, all of human progress, really.
But it's also the single greatest source of self-sabotage.
Yes. Lack of self-control and profound misery.
So the philosophical challenge is both profound and very practical. How do we reconcile reason and desire? Are they meant to be masters and slaves, or could they be partners?
And which desires are actually worthy of a rational person's pursuit? How do we learn to satisfy them without completely sacrificing our long-term happiness?
Exactly.
Our mission today is to trace this whole evolution, offering you a kind of shortcut through centuries of thought. We're going to start with the fierce rationalism of Socrates. Then we'll move through the more integrated approach offered by Aristotle, pause to examine the radical simplicity proposed by the naturalists, the Cynics and Epicureans.
Which is a fascinating detour.
It is. And finally, we face the shocking modern disruption brought by Hobbes, culminating in David Hume's complete redefinition of reason's role.
It is a journey that will, I think, profoundly change how you think about moral motivation. We are moving from the belief that knowledge alone is enough to control the passions to the unsettling possibility that maybe passion is the only thing that can control passion.
That is a fascinating thought. So let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
To begin, we have to establish the high watermark of rational control. Socrates, as we see him in Plato's early, fiercely ethical dialogues, I'm thinking mainly of the Gorgias and the Protagoras.
Right.
His central thesis couldn't be starker. Living virtuously or syngated and seeking knowledge are fundamentally, and I think often tragically, opposed to the immediate satisfaction of our desires.
For Socrates, desire is a profound obstacle, and it's mainly because of its focus on immediacy. The moment an appetite arises for food, revenge, luxury, whatever, it demands satisfaction now.
Right now.
And that demand acts as this massive brake on the sustained, rigorous, reflective effort you need to attain any kind of virtue or knowledge. If your focus is always on the nearest, quickest gratification, you just can't commit to the long-term, difficult task of self-examination.
And this wasn't just some personal ethical preference for him. It was a political position. It put him directly at odds with the powerful rhetoricians of Athens, particularly people like Callicles and Polos and the Gorgias.
Precisely. Callicles offers this democratic rhetorical view of the good life. He basically defines it as total, limitless freedom.
The freedom to do whatever you want.
The freedom to satisfy every desire, no matter how immense or destructive, with zero constraint. He actually argues that restraint, sophrosune, is just a convention invented by the weak majority to hold back the truly strong and talented individual.
And his archetype for this life is the successful pirate, Archelaus. This is a man who attained supreme power through crime and just enjoyed absolute impunity.
And for them, pleasure is fundamentally identical to the good. That's the key. If you have the power to take it and enjoy it, then that is the definition of a successful life.
And Socrates just completely inverts this idea.
He delivers this devastating critique, both politically and ethically. He argues that this perceived freedom is actually a form of deep tyranny.
But not tyranny over others.
No, not really. It's a tyranny over the self. The life dedicated to limitless desire leads directly to injustice because it requires instrumentalizing other people purely for your own selfish interest. The person who lives this way is, perpetually dependent on external things and external people to fulfill their lacks.
And to make this concrete, he uses one of the most durable and frankly terrifying images in all of philosophical literature.
The allegory of the leaky barrel.
Yes.
It's an image drawn from a myth about the miseries people endure in Hades. And Socrates describes two types of souls, represented by jars or barrels. The temperate soul has barrels that are sound, whole, and filled. Once they're filled with necessities, this soul enjoys tranquility and serenity. This is the goal.
But the soul of the life of license, the one Callicles thinks is ideal, has barrels that are leaky, cracked, and constantly draining.
The partially empty barrel symbolizes these constantly unsatisfied, insatiable desires. For this disordered soul, satisfying a desire only provides a fleeting, superficial pleasure.
Because the lack immediately comes back.
Exactly. The desire for drink is momentarily satisfied, only for the desire for luxury or wealth or revenge to immediately pop up and replace it. The barrel can never, ever stay full.
And Callicles famously pushes back.
Right.
He says that the life of the filled barrel is the life of a stone or a corpse. He wants that rush.
He wants the excitement of filling. And Socrates' reply is the core lesson here. The Dionysian man, the tyrant, the glutton, he's not free. He is the most abject slave possible.
A slave to his own desires.
A slave to his own ceaseless, fleeting appetites. He's dependent on lack. He has to perpetually recreate the conditions of a need just to experience the momentary pleasure of satisfying it. This lack of control deprives him of the reflective capacity he needs for true knowledge, which is the only real path to virtue.
Okay, so if the problem is rooted in ignorance, this inability to correctly tell the difference between a true long-term good and a false short-term pleasure, how does Socrates propose we gain this mastery?
Well, he suggests this revolutionary idea of a virtue science.
Science of virtue.
Yes, the art of measure, or metrotyche, which he details in the Protagoras. Socrates famously says that no one chooses evil willingly.
Which is a huge claim.
It's a massive claim. He says if someone chooses an action that causes them harm, it's only because they mistook the short-term pleasure for the greater long-term good. It's an error in calculation, not some kind of corruption of the will.
That sounds incredibly ambitious. I mean, how exactly does a mathematical calculation work in a moral context?
And this is where you see the intense idealism of Socratic philosophy. Metrotyche is meant to be an exact moral science, aiming to calculate all the consequences.
All of them.
All of them. Imagine you're debating whether to accept a profitable but corrupt business deal. The art requires you to gather all the pleasant and painful elements, the reputation you'll lose, the momentary joy of the bribe, the long-term erosion of your character, and put them on a kind of moral scale.
And then just choose the one with the better long-term outcome.
You choose the action that yields the greatest aggregate long-term good for your entire life.
But that requires an impossible amount of foresight. It assumes you have perfect knowledge of the future, which, we don't.
It does, and that's precisely why it highlights the Socratic ideal. Virtue requires an almost divine objective knowledge. The function of this art is to counteract the distorting power of momentary desire, which makes a small, immediate pleasure seem much larger and more important than a huge long-term pain. Metrotyche is supposed to restore the correct perspective.
So the core takeaway from Socrates is this profound ethical point. The immediate satisfaction of desire directly impairs your reflective capacity. It leads to ignorance, which he says is the greatest evil. So temperance, sophrosune, isn't just a nice-to-have moral quality. It's the absolute precondition for philosophical reflection and self-knowledge.
You've got it. If you're constantly scrambling to fill those leaky barrels, you lack the tranquility of mind. You need to even begin measuring what the true good is. The goal is absolute intellectual mastery.
Making desire totally subservient to cold, hard calculation.
Exactly.
Socrates set an impossible bar, really, demanding a rational mastery that seems unattainable for most of us. Aristotle, though, our next great thinker, he approaches the problem with a more realistic, maybe more psychologically astute view.
Yes, he seeks conciliation between reason and desire. He moves away from this idea that desire is just an inherent enemy.
So a major structural shift.
It is. Aristotle still has the idea of the soul having an intellectual, purely rational part. But his big innovation is in how he sees the desiring, or appetitive part. He says this part is non-rational, sure, but it's capable of listening to and obeying reason.
So it's not a slave to be crushed.
No, more like a child or a well-trained horse to be guided.
Which means desire isn't something to be ignored, it's something to be educated and cultivated from an early age.
Exactly. And this is the foundation of his whole ethical framework, which is centered on moral virtues. He defines these as dispositions to act with mediety, the just mean between extremes.
Right, like courage is the mean between cowardice and recklessness.
Precisely. And crucially, these moral virtues are the fruit of habit. We cultivate desires, which he calls boulesis, a kind of rational will or wish, so that the appetitive part of the soul acts in perfect harmony with the rational part. The generous man doesn't reluctantly force himself to help his friend in distress. He wants to help. The action is intrinsically desirable for him because his character has been rightly formed.
The action itself just flows naturally from the character. It's not forced by some calculus. And this integrated approach depends entirely on what Aristotle calls practical wisdom, or phronesis.
Phronesis is the absolute operational center of Aristotelian ethics. It is the capacity to reason correctly about actions that are relevant to the overall good life, or eudaimonia.
But it's not abstract theoretical knowledge, like knowing physics.
Emphatically not. It is applied operational wisdom that works in the realm of particulars and the messiness of specific circumstances.
So how does phronesis actually mediate between the intellectual goal, the good life, and the specific desire you feel in the moment?
Aristotle suggests phronesis is almost like a perceptual capacity that you develop through intense moral training. Think of a master musician who, after years of practice, doesn't need to consciously think about finger placement.
They just see the music and their fingers move correctly.
Exactly. In the same way, the virtuous person, through habituation, develops the ability to see the ethical stakes in a specific situation with total clarity. This perception is so acute that non-ethical actions, even if they might be generally pleasurable, become entirely undesirable in that specific context. The right course of action is just revealed, and the educated desire immediately aligns with that perception.
So it sounds like the truly virtuous person doesn't even feel the temptation for the wrong thing. Their desire structure has been completely rewired.
That is the ideal state, yes, for the virtuous agent. Aristotle expresses this profound interdependence. We cannot be good without practical wisdom, nor practically wise without virtue of character.
The two go together.
They're inseparable. Desires are essential. If your desires are untrained and unruly, you lack the character necessary to even perceive the right course of action in the first place. This is why Aristotle emphasizes that moral education has to begin early, focusing on doing noble deeds until the desire for them just becomes second nature.
And this careful distinction allows Aristotle to analyze that psychological phenomenon that Socrates kind of struggled to explain.
Weakness of will.
Right, akrasia.
The Socratic agent is the person who experiences true internal conflict. They intellectually know what is right. I should not eat that second dessert. Yet they act against that belief because of a forceful, immediate desire.
And this is totally different from the intemperate person.
Completely. The intemperate person just thinks eating the second dessert is a great idea. There's no conflict for them.
The Socratic agent is deeply frustrating to themselves, though, because they know better, but they still falter.
And Aristotle's analysis here is just psychologically brilliant. He suggests the Socratic agent possesses the universal premise, all heavy sweet foods are bad for my health, but fails to engage the specific particular premise, this piece of cake in front of me is a heavy sweet food, at the moment of action.
So the desire gets in the way.
The desire, the appetitive part, manages to temporarily seize control, clouding the specific perception needed to connect the universal knowledge to the present reality. Their knowledge in that moment is like reciting a poem while you're drunk or asleep. It's there, theoretically, but it's not operationally present.
So it's not that reason is defeated by desire, but that a momentary passion prevents the phronesis, the practical perception, from fully engaging with the knowledge at that crucial moment.
Precisely. The truly virtuous person has trained their desires to be obedient. They've ensured that their appetite is oriented toward the noble. And this alignment means the ethical choice is the most desirable choice, and they achieve self-mastery not by fighting their desires, but by having desires that are already noble.
As we move into later antiquity, we see this fascinating shift. Two schools, the Cynics and the Epicureans, they look past the high rationalism of Plato and the nuanced character development of Aristotle, and they focus on just one supreme criterion for judging desire: nature.
They really do. They share a common starting point. The recognition that so much human misery stems from complexity, anxiety, and the pursuit of things that are external and hard to get.
And their shared goal is ataraxia, tranquility.
Tranquility and freedom. But they define and achieve these through radically different approaches to nature and desire management.
Okay, let's start with the extreme example. Diogenes the Cynic. If Socrates critiqued the tyrant, Diogenes critiqued civilization itself.
That's exactly right. Diogenes argues that our unhappiness stems almost entirely from conventions and artificial needs. Laws, complex social structures, money, luxury. He believed the life granted to us by the gods and nature is naturally easy and self-sufficient, but we're constantly losing that ease by chasing manufactured refinements.
So his solution is this radical material autarky self-sufficiency, achieved by stripping life down to the absolute bare necessities and rejecting all convention.
Diogenes sought freedom by becoming utterly independent. He lived in a tub or a large storage jar. He owned basically nothing, and he inspired the term the dog, kynikos. The key model for him was the animal, which only seeks necessities and isn't burdened by fear of reputation or a desire for wealth. He famously saw a boy drinking water from his hands and immediately threw away his own simple cup.
Realizing he could simplify even further.
Exactly. His entire life was a constant act of public performance designed to expose the absurdity of Athenian social conventions and these artificial desires.
And this required rigorous physical training, what he called ascesis.
And this is where he really opposed Platonic intellectualism. Plato claimed knowledge of the good was achieved through pure contemplation. For Diogenes, knowledge was concrete, gained through daily experience and painful physical discipline. He would deliberately roll in hot sand in the summer or walk barefoot in the snow.
Why? I mean, what was the point of that?
To increase his resistance to physical discomfort. By doing that, he reduces dependence on the external need for comfort, for ease, for pleasure. For him, the struggle was physical and immediate, and it was meant to achieve a freedom that went beyond philosophical argumentation.
So Diogenes sought freedom through radical, painful austerity. Now contrast that with Epicurus, who also looked to nature, but arrived at a highly calculated form of pleasure.
Epicurus certainly defines pleasure, hedon, as the telos, the end goal of a happy existence, but he rigorously restricts what that pleasure is. For him, pleasure is not the rush of momentary indulgence.
It's defined negatively.
Yes, it's ataraxia, the absence of mental trouble, and the absence of physical pain. He argues that pursuing boundless, violent hedonism always creates more long-term pain than it does short-term gain.
Which means the goal is management, not surrender. And the key is careful discrimination.
Exactly. His main contribution to desire management is his famous typology of desires. It's a precise three-part system for achieving tranquility.
Okay, what are the three parts?
First, you have non-natural or vain-empty desires. These are for things that are almost impossible to satisfy: fame, immense wealth, luxurious banquets. They're hard to obtain, easy to lose, and create immense dependency and anxiety. So these are rejected entirely.
Get rid of them.
Get rid of them. Second, natural but non-necessary desires. These include things like elaborate food, expensive clothing, specific sexual desires. They aren't inherently bad, but they are risky. They don't relieve physical pain, they just diversify pleasure, and that often creates more trouble than good. So you have to be extremely vigilant.
Yeah.
And the third and most important, natural and necessary desires. These must be satisfied for happiness. Basic survival needs: eating, drinking, shelter fall here. But crucially, Epicurus includes philosophical practice itself in this category.
That distinction is remarkable. Why is philosophical practice considered a necessary natural desire right alongside food and water?
Because for Epicurus, philosophy serves a practical, instrumental function. It is medicine for the soul. The greatest source of human anxiety, and thus the greatest source of pain and destructive desire, is irrational fear.
Fear of death, fear of the gods.
Fear of future suffering, yeah. Epicurean physics and logic are designed to eliminate these fears, allowing a person to realize that their true, natural needs are few, easy to acquire, and limited.
So, while Diogenes sought freedom through physical pain and austerity, rejecting intellectualism, Epicurus sought tranquility through intense rational calculation. He used philosophy as a tool to dispel the fears that drive destructive artificial desires.
They shared the criterion of nature, but they radically diverged in their method. They show us that the quest for self-sufficiency can be a life of extreme rejection or a life of meticulous, reasoned acceptance of minimal pleasures.
When we transition to the 17th century with Thomas Hobbes, we move from these philosophical debates about objective nature and virtue to a cold, hard, materialist psychology. The ancient framework of good versus bad desires is just utterly demolished.
This is a radical break in normative ethics, a complete one. Hobbes rejects the ancient hierarchy because he rejects the premise that an object has inherent external value. For him, value is subjective. It's conferred by the subject.
So what you desire is good.
What is desired is good. What is hated is evil. There is no external measure of the good that reason can discover, and this really sets the stage for the modern understanding of human motivation.
If value is subjective, how does his materialist psychology work to explain human action?
Hobbes is deeply mechanistic. He argues that all human mental states, thoughts, passions, desires, are just the results of external sensation impacting our internal organs. Thoughts are just combinations of sensations and imagination, what he calls degraded sensation.
Wow.
And action begins with these tiny internal efforts, either appetited desire, which is a tiny motion toward an object, or aversion, a tiny motion away. This movement, this internal discourse, is purely material and sequential.
So our mind is essentially a machine processing movement, and desire is just the first internal movement toward a perceived pleasure.
Exactly. And because this process is ceaseless, happiness cannot be the realization of a final, stable desire, like Aristotle's eudaimonia. For Hobbes, happiness is defined as the continual success in obtaining new desired objects, a continuous flow of movement.
Which necessitates.
It necessitates what he famously calls an unquiet desire of acquiring power after power that ceaseth only in death.
That drive for power isn't necessarily malicious then. It's a deeply rational psychological necessity.
It's entirely rational within his framework. We acquire power, whether it's wealth, knowledge, friends, or strength, not for its own sake, but because we have to secure the present means of living well. And to secure the means of living well today, you have to secure the means for the future, which means acquiring more means.
Which leads to this relentless, unquiet desire for power.
Exactly. If you stop acquiring power, you risk losing what you already have to someone else who is still striving.
And this inherent, subjective, limitless appetite, when you place it alongside limited resources and equally driven individuals, throws us straight into the state of nature. What does that state reveal about the relationship between reason and passion?
The state of nature is his thought experiment that shows the political consequence of unchecked subjective desire. Since all individuals are basically equal in their vulnerability, even the weakest can plot and kill the strongest, and all are pursuing their power and desires, they must enter a constant, terrifying competition.
And it's a conflict rooted in both passion and rational calculation.
Yes. Hobbes identifies three primary causes of quarrel that drive this war.
What are they?
Rivalry, driven by the passion for game, to acquire mastery over others' property. Pride or glory, driven by the passion for reputation, to make sure others value you highly enough not to challenge you. And critically, diffidence or distrust.
Tell me more about diffidence, because that seems to be the key factor that forces even a peaceful person into violence.
Diffidence means distrust.
Yeah.
Since you know that every other person is relentlessly pursuing power and may invade your safety and property at any moment, the only rational way to secure yourself is by preemption.
You attack first.
You attack preemptively to establish a dominance that discourages others from attacking you later. This desire for security, a basic passion, is rationally fulfilled by violence in the state of nature. And this is why the state of nature is so miserable. It's a continuous war of all against all, making a life that is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short.
So limitless subjective desire is the origin of the political problem. And the only way out is through the social contract, which is this massive break on those desires.
It is. The desire to escape the pain and fear of the state of nature is the deepest, most persistent passion self-preservation. Reason then acts as a tool, a calculator, to find the most efficient means to satisfy that passion. The social contract is born from this rational calculation. Agents transfer their power to the Leviathan, a strong sovereign authority, to ensure common security.
So reason's role is totally different.
It shifts entirely. It is not about finding the objective good, but finding the most effective means to satisfy the persistent desire for life and security.
And this brings us to David Hume, who takes the materialist instrumental view of reason that Hobbes established and just pushes it to its ultimate destabilizing conclusion.
He really does.
Hume questions the entire premise of the conflict we've been tracking for centuries, this assumption that the sage is the master of self, where reason should dominate passion.
Hume essentially argues that philosophers have just massively overestimated the capacity of reason. If reason's tools are so limited, how can it ever genuinely dominate anything? And he carefully divides reason's operations to show its inherent lack of motivational power.
He defines two types of reasoning, and neither of them can cause action on its own.
Correct. First, there's demonstrative reasoning. This deals only with the relations of ideas, the certainties of mathematics and logic. 2 + 2 = 4. This is totally abstract and distant from volition. It establishes necessary truths, but it cannot compel you to walk across the room or feel kindness.
Okay, what's the second?
Second is causal reasoning, or probabilistic reasoning. This deals with cause and effect in the world of realities. This is crucial for practical life. It tells us that if you do X, Y will probably happen, but it only directs the action. The original impulse, that feeling of desire or aversion, never originates from causal reason itself.
Reason, therefore, is purely instrumental. It is the sophisticated tool we use to figure out how to achieve a goal, but it cannot set the goal itself. The goal is always set by a feeling.
Exactly. The initial aversion or inclination always comes from the expectation of pleasure or pain, which is the definition of passion. Hume then moves to his radical definition of passion. Passions are original existences.
What does that mean, original existence?
They're impressions. They are feelings, not copies or representations of other things. If I feel thirsty, that thirst is a reality. It's not a proposition that can be verified as true or false.
And this leads directly to the core logical bomb he drops on centuries of ethical thought.
It does. Since contradiction, the foundation of logic and reason, only exists between ideas and the objects they represent. Truth claims, a passion being an original existence, a feeling cannot logically be contrary to reason.
You can't tell a passion it's wrong any more than you can tell the color blue it's wrong.
That's a perfect way to put it, and this is the critical juncture leading to that famous incendiary thesis. Reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions and can never pretend to any other office than to serve and obey them.
But wait a minute. If reason is just a slave, how do you explain the entire Enlightenment project? Philosophers from Locke to Kant believed reason could fundamentally change society, drive moral progress, and create institutions based on natural rights. If reason can only serve pre-existing feelings, how could it ever push us toward a morally better future?
That is an excellent challenge, and Hume's response is crucial. Reason is a powerful, irreplaceable tool, but its power is purely instrumental. Reason can clarify our desires, it can expand our knowledge of cause and effect, and it can show us how one passion will contradict another. It can convince us that a short-term pleasure will cause long-term pain.
Okay.
But when we call a desire unreasonable, Hume argues we are only speaking in an improper sense. We're pointing to an error in the use of reason, not a fault in the passion itself.
What are those two specific errors in the improper sense?
They're technical errors, not moral ones. First, the passion is founded on a false belief about the existence of its object. For example, if your desire is to get revenge on a person you believe wronged you, but reason demonstrates that person was actually innocent,
then the passion just collapses.
the passion immediately collapses because the premise was false. Reason corrected the premise, and the passion shifted. The second error is when the passion uses insufficient means to achieve the desired end. You want to save money for retirement, but you use a method that actually loses money. Reason critiques the means and directs the original passion, the desire for security, toward a more effective course of action.
So in both scenarios, reason is just serving to correct the map or verify the coordinates. The initial impulse, the desire for security or pleasure or the aversion to pain, that remains the sole motivating factor.
Exactly. When a desire seems to yield to reason, it's not because reason defeated the passion. It's because reason showed the passion that its current object would lead to pain rather than pleasure. The passion for pleasure simply shifts its course to a different object.
So, if the traditional struggle between reason and desire is, in his view, illusory, what does the true internal struggle look like for Hume?
It becomes a conflict between passions. Hume distinguishes between violent passions and calm passions. Calm passions, like a generalized benevolence, love of life, or the general appetite for long-term good, produce very little emotional disturbance. They are steady, consistent, and they involve calculation, which is why they are often mistakenly identified as pure reason by previous philosophers.
These calm passions, then, are the key to self-mastery, because they are the only internal forces consistent enough to counteract the fleeting violent ones.
That's the core of his practical moral psychology. He elaborates on this in his essay on the delicacy of taste and delicacy of passion.
Okay.
Delicacy of passion is the problem. This is an excessive sensitivity to life's accidents, a proneness to sharp sorrows, quick resentment, or exaggerated joy. This leads to profound misery and imprudent actions because it makes us dependent on things we cannot control: fortune, other people's opinions, external events.
So if you have a delicacy of passion every time someone cuts you off in traffic or a minor comment goes wrong on social media, you suffer acutely.
Precisely. The violence of the passion takes over, leading to rage or despair. Hume advocates instead for cultivating delicacy of taste. This is a refinement in judging beauty, genius, arts, and conversation. It relies on solid judgment and involves engaging with internal, controllable objects. A good book, refined music, sophisticated analysis, thoughtful conversation.
That makes the shift so practical. Cultivating a steady, calm desire for intellectual and aesthetic pleasure, a delicacy of taste, actively helps subdue the destructive external passions.
Because the gentle, calm pleasures of reading a difficult but beautiful book, or engaging in calm, reasoned debate, are consistent, internal, and easy to access. By increasing the presence of these gentle pleasures, which are calm passions, we reduce the relative attractiveness and power of the violent, tumultuous external passions that rely on luck and external affirmation.
It's self-mastery achieved not by defeating passion with reason.
But by strategically empowering a good passion with the aid of reason.
Wow, what a profound evolution in understanding the inner life. We began with Socrates, who demanded the mastery of desire through the objective science of metrityke to ensure self-knowledge. Then Aristotle gave us a path to conciliation, where trained desire becomes integrated into moral excellence through phronesis and good habits.
The naturalists, Diogenes and Epicurus, they stripped the debate down to bare necessity, using nature as the sole criterion to simplify life and achieve autarkia or ataraxia.
And the modern era brought Hobbes, who saw subjective, limitless desire as the necessary source of all political conflict, requiring the external break of the Leviathan.
And finally, Hume. He delivered the ultimate psychological challenge, proclaiming that reason is inherently subordinate and can only operate as the slave tool of our initial fundamental motivations.
For you, the learner, the most crucial distinction from this entire deep dive might be Hume's quiet insight. The struggle for self-mastery isn't some mystical battle between the mind and the body.
No, it's often a subtle internal competition between calm, reflective passions, the steady desire for long-term health, financial security, or consistent tranquility, and violent, immediate passions, the sudden impulse, the sugar craving, the rush of anger. Understanding this distinction is, I think, the key to managing your own moral trajectory.
And if we accept Hume's framework, that means the project of moral improvement, both personally and for society, shifts dramatically away from just teaching people logic.
It does. The ancient philosophers believed knowledge could defeat fear and thus tame desire. But if Hume is right that reason is just a calculating tool serving pre-existing passions, then improving morality relies entirely on cultivating the right initial desires, the calm, reflective ones, rather than just teaching people better arguments or better math. This requires focusing on the structure of motivation itself.
So the question for you listening is,
are you feeding your quiet, long-term appetite for well-being by engaging in controllable internal pleasures, or are you constantly subjecting yourself to the violent external passions of the immediate moment?
that distinction, calm versus violent passions, is the philosophical inheritance we can use every single day. Thank you for joining us for this profound deep dive into the philosopher's struggle.
We hope this knowledge aids your internal governance.